Now, the other reason the other thing I want to talk about is when you decide that you want to strike out on your own or you want to go and find a new opportunity, this is a great time to actually interview the company that you're going to, right? A lot of times I have people come up to me and they say, well, I took this job and obviously I needed to pay rent and the bills, and I understand, San Francisco rent is getting expensive. So I understand all of that, but too often what happens is people take the first opportunity that's given to them rather than taking the time to do some research. And what that research means is that you actually ask them questions. So the way that you want to ask them questions is called a behavior style interview, where you ask them questions where you give them situations and then listen to what their responses are. And based on those responses, you can tell whether they're telling the truth or not. So a great question to ask for this kind of situation is, when was the last time someone was promoted? Right? You don't even have to say, who was promoted or what was the role, but just when was the last time? And if they're like, promoted, what the hell is that, right? You get a sense of, okay, so it seems like there's not a whole lot going on. Or if they tell you, yes, we're on a 6-month or 9-month or 12-month promotion cycle, you have a good sense of what the cycles are. And then if you ask them what was the criteria, right? And they could say something like, well, this person came in and 10x'd our revenue, or they did a really great job of training new hires, or they improved quality. Then you have a sense of what it takes to make a promotion or have a promotion in that company. The other is thinking about transitions, right? You might start off on the web team and, hey, maybe you're really interested in mobile, or maybe you do want to work up to be that technical lead or architect, right? So having a sense of what are the transitions like? Can some people go from one business unit to another or one project to another, or are they sort of hermetically sealed and labeled the minute that they walk in, right? So it's important to get a sense of, do people make transitions, and who was the last person that made a transition? And why they made the transition, right? So asking those kinds of probing questions can oftentimes give you a good sense of what the organization is like. And the final thing I'll mention is understanding the day-to-day. Like, what's it like to work there, right? This doesn't mean that you have to ask questions like, hey, do you all go out for beers, right? You can be like, what do you guys do for fun? But also understanding the day-to-day of the role itself, right? What am I going to be expected to do here? Am I going to be expected to deploy code daily, to make sure that I'm talking to all these different business units, right? Or what are sort of my day-to-day deliverables? What are my goals and objectives? And understanding really what are your roles and responsibilities, but that you don't necessarily have to be limited to those, right? If you want to grow, if you want to do something like work on a different team or a different project, you have that flexibility to do so. So a lot of times, people will say, well, I've done all this stuff, but I really want that promotion, or I really do want to be that technical lead, and I'm kind of stuck as to what to do next. And this is where I think taking some time to get a sense of what other people are doing can be helpful, right? So asking colleagues what they did to transition from one role to the other, or asking friends, or even reaching out to mentors, right? And explain to them that this is something that you want, but you're just not sure what the steps are, and actually having them walk you through some of the steps. Right? Because a lot of times it's very high level. It's like, oh, if you want to be in product management, you should go and take a product management class, or you should be really good at analytics, or you should be really good at talking to customers. Okay, but that doesn't explain how I can transition into that role, right? Or if I want to transition into being a software architect, what's it going to take to have those steps in place? Now, depending on their perspective, and hopefully you get some variety of perspectives, do keep in mind that it is their perspective. So a lot of times people can color their experience, and they can say either negative things, hopefully positive things, but you want to make sure that you are kind of decoupling the process of how they got into it from maybe the negative experience that they've had. Now, after saying all of this, I know you're going to say, well, I'm not ready to be a software architect yet, or I'm not ready to be a VP of engineering, or ready to be a manager. And this isn't to set you up to go to your boss tomorrow and ask for a promotion or ask to be switched, right? This is just to give you some time to think. But the other thing that I want you to realize is that you're pretty much never going to be ready, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean by that is you're going to have to constantly learn, right? Being technical, but being in any field, even photographers have to learn like the latest technology. Even talking to Michael, he's had to learn the latest operating systems for these cameras, right? So regardless of what field, you have to sort of keep learning the new technology or the new tools, the new frameworks. But remember what I said before, they're usually pretty much very similar, right? So it's not like things are so drastically different, right? They've all kind of kept up in terms of the theme of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. The other is don't be afraid to ask for training, right? Just because you're stepping into a new role, I think a lot of times people get overwhelmed thinking about what they don't know, rather than realizing that the reason that they were put into this new role or that they're even being presented with an opportunity is because they've demonstrated some capabilities, right? Thinking back to Courtney, they gave her that instructor position not because she had been an instructor in the coding sense, she'd been a dance instructor, right? So she had some ways of demonstrating that she was capable. But if you do feel like there are areas in which you just aren't 100%, then it's taking the time to get that training, right? To ask for some of that training, or to do it on your own, right? I think that's a great thing that Jasmine did is she went out and she joined Hackbright because she wanted to get some of that training on her own. So let's talk about how we actually do the transition now, right? Because it's not enough to just say, okay, we want this, right? We've got to actually do it. So the first is create a plan. But when I say create a plan, I don't mean create a plan in which you're like, this is my 5-year plan, and I will like only do this 5 years. It's okay. Yeah, so when I say create a plan, right, I don't mean like, this is my plan and that's it, I'm sticking to it, and like all I want to do is be a software architect and that's it. Any other opportunity I'm going to say no to, right? You don't have to create a plan in which you're so rigid, right? Create a plan in which you kind of have a sense of, hey, this is something that I've thought about, like I'd like to be an architect, or I'd like to lead a team, or I'd like to be a professor, or I'd like to be a teacher, right? You don't have to pick so many different things, but pick, maybe a couple areas. And the other part of this plan is that you think about what the role is that you want, and then why it is that you want it, right? Why is it that you want to be an architect? Or like I was speaking to this VP of Cisco, she said, I really wanted to switch to management after many, many years of being an engineer because I wanted to control the resources. I actually wanted to make sure that the projects that I wanted to get off the ground would actually get off the ground, right? So understand why it is that you want it. And then finally, come up with a plan to educate yourself so that you know that you are capable of doing it. So the key is when we're talking about doing this transition, a lot of times people will do the background work. I know all of you are going to go out there and you're going to put in the effort. You're going to read the books. You're going to do the training programs. I've met so many people who have like PhDs and masters and also been to boot camps, and it's just amazing how well educated they are. But the problem is that they're not conveying some of that, right? They're not conveying some of it in terms of stories, in terms of what they have accomplished. And that's why I bring back the story of Courtney, because it's a pretty simple story and people can relate to it, right? So demonstrating through stories, whatever the projects were that you worked on in the past, whether they were technical or not, right? And how that can relate to this new role that you're interested in. And then finally, doing the ask, right? Making sure that people are understanding what it is that you want in terms of the new position. But the thing with doing the ask is, a lot of times, once again, people do this in such a way that it's kind of confusing. It's like, oh, if an opportunity opens up, I'd really like to be a VP of engineering. Like, who's going to give you a position, right? So being very clear about what it is that you want. Now, I know after saying this, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not sure because I want to work up to it, right? I'm not sure I can take this position just yet. So one of the things that I recommend is doing this technique called a bite-sized sale. And what that looks like is you might have in mind, 6 months or 1 year down the road, you want to be a lead of something, right? Whether it's technical or whether it's on the management side or product or whatever it is. And so you march up to your boss and you actually say, hey, I would like to meet with you for some time and I'd like to talk about sort of my general career path here. And one of the things that's important to me is I would like to eventually be a team lead And I'd like to work up to that in 6 to 9 months. Can we sit down together and come up with some milestones that I can achieve? And those milestones being projects, training, etc. Now, chances are, if they are a supportive boss in a good environment, they're going to actually support you, right? And if they're not, they're going to be like, I don't have time. Or there's not a lot of opportunities here. Or they're just not going to respond, right? And that'll be a good indication for you of what it is that you need to do, right? But a lot of times I've seen people who do this, one, feel a little bit more comfortable because they're like, oh, I'm demonstrating that I'm capable over time. But two, the manager or their boss now is also, very clear on what it is that this person wants and can sort of measure them over time. And the reason that that's important is people feel like they're taking on a big risk when they put somebody in a management position, right? Their ass is on the line. And so they don't want to necessarily put someone who they feel like, well, they were just an engineer the other day. I don't know if they're capable of leading a team. But if instead you can demonstrate for 6 months on a project or even something as simple as managing interns or managing 1 or 2 employees, then it gives them a sense of, yes, this person is capable. So being able to show progress over time oftentimes is what you need to do in order to get that position, right? You don't want to just do it internally where you're like, oh, I've been managing all these people and no one's noticed it. You definitely want to call it out and put something on paper. So the reason this is important is because you're actually making their decision easier, right? You're mitigating risk by giving them a little bit of a taste of what it's going to be like if you decide to go down this particular path full-time of being being a technical lead or being a manager. So give that a shot if that's of interest to you and you feel like you can't just march up and demand the position tomorrow. Now, a lot of times I'll say this and people will be like, well, I asked and then they said no, or they didn't get back to me. They were just like, oh, we'll see. So on a final note, what I want you to walk away with is to also give people a good understanding of what the cost of inaction is. Meaning, if in 6 months or in 9 months' time they don't come back to you and they don't appreciate the work that you've done or they don't recognize you for it, then knowing that you have other opportunities somewhere else, right? And you have to clearly state, hey, we talked about this together. It seems like you're not in a position to take this decision or make some change, so I'm going to have to look for other opportunities, right? I know it feels like a little bit like a threat, but that's why you pre-negotiated 6 months ago that this could happen. So give them one final cost of inaction, what it's going to be if they don't make a decision, positive or negative, but they just kind of leave you in limbo land. All right? So we've talked a little bit about the variety of roles. I talked about 5 to 10 technical roles that are out there. And mind you, those are not the only ones that exist, right? There's definitely a blending of roles. There's also new roles that come out. And then I talked about what it means to stay technical, right? It doesn't just mean that you have to know everything or that you're going to be coding all the time. There are higher level projects that you can work on. And if you're still curious, then what I would say is take some time to reach out to some folks, buy them coffee, buy them lunch, whatever it is that you need to do in order to get them to give you a better sense of what their job entails on a day-to-day. But the other piece is look back at your projects, right? What was it that initially inspired you or interested you in getting into engineering? And are there roles like that exist today that you can also get involved in? And then, I'll leave the decision of whether you want to go on a technical path or a management path, but get a better understanding of what both of those are before you make the jump. Because like I said, I come across a lot of people who do, make the jump one way or the other, and then they're like, oh, I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. So take some time to do some research and know that you have the time to do that. And then finally, you can make the transition within your organization, but it's a matter of maybe putting together a plan with your boss or even figuring out if there is a need, and then demonstrating that you're capable over a period of time. And just because your organization doesn't have it, right, even if you're in a small company, you can still highlight the need for it, right? That, hey, we're growing as a company, and I'm not certainly going to be the only one working here, so there's probably going to be others who have this concern as well. So you can certainly start to put some of that process in place. Don't feel like you can't.